Yo, what is up guys, the boy IzuKage here with a new what if, and this what if is what if Deku ate the Suna Suna no Mi. So most of you said you like the Mei ship, but I'm gonna switch it up for this one, so look out for that. Also, thank you guys so much for 12,000 subscribers. I know I haven't been posting a lot lately, but exams, yada yada yada. I'll be done with those in about 2 weeks, and then bro, I'm telling you, every day in summer I'm posting. Well, maybe, don't hold me to that. But anyways, with that all said, let's get right into the what if. So last time we left off with Izuku, he just got home from a close call with a villain, but All Might showed up just in time to save him. Now it's time for the 9-month training period. During these 9 months, Izuku would develop his sand abilities to more longer range attack. So the first month, he would try to extend the sand from his hand into an attack, but he's doing all of this in his room and there's just not enough space. So Izuku, with the help of his old friend, Google, found a beach nearby, and online he sees a bunch of pictures of the beach and it's just filled with trash, seemingly abandoned. So Izuku took this as a blessing in disguise and went to check it out. He got to the beach, and as he stepped foot onto it, it was like he could feel every grain on the beach. His mind was being bombarded with all these kinds of stimuli, and he ran back to the streets and fell to one knee, trying to catch his breath. He thought, what was that? It was like he could sense everything on the beach. So Izuku stood there for a few minutes while people passing by just thought he was a weirdo. Izuku finally got up and now prepared. He put a single foot onto the sand and there it was again. He could practically see everything on the beach without actually seeing it. Like those two guys training by the trash. So Izuku fully went onto the sand and it was still a lot, but this time he was prepared. Now everything was more detailed. He could tell a person's weight or body type just from how much they displaced the sand. And back to the guys that he sensed earlier by the trash, he could tell how one of them was really skinny and the other was a kid around his age. So right here in the script, I was actually gonna make, All Might be training with someone, but I wanted you guys to choose, whether it be, Izuku gets one for all, or someone from Class 1A, or Mirio, or a villain, who knows, could make this story even more interesting. So Izuku didn't care though, and he got to training right away. Izuku would throw a punch and see how far it could extend his arm with the sand, but it wasn't that far. Izuku spent 6 hours trying it over and over, but without success. He just can't get it far enough, so Izuku goes home for the day. Day 2, and Izuku thought just how he could increase his range all night, and the problem he was having was his sand just fell apart when it got too far. So he thought, why not just use the sand around him? So Izuku gets back to the beach and he completely forgot about the whole sensing thing, so it caught him off guard, but he adapted. So Izuku made a loose blade with his right hand that he always does, but this time he stabs it into the ground, and from it a giant wave came up and cut through everything that was in his path, even a rock. Izuku was excited, it finally worked, and he thought of a name for his move. After all these other heroes would name their moves, so why not him? So how about Desert Sword? Izuku was happy with the name and continued to increase the range of his moves. By the way, these are just the English translations of Crocodile's actual moves, so yeah. So 4 months go by and Izuku had almost perfected his Desert Sword and decided to train his body a bit more, as well as, lifting all this heavy machinery off the beach, doing something good in the process, which actually only takes him 3 weeks, a bit less than a month. So for the final 3 months of the training period, Izuku decided to finally use that ability, the one that made him a murderer years ago. And this isn't like One Piece. Once the moisture is sucked out of your body, you're just dead. You can't just chuck some water on yourself and rehydrate like you're a sponge or something. But yeah, anyways, that little tangent over. Izuku realizes he has way more abilities on the sand, so what if he could bring sand anywhere he could go? He would be pretty much unstoppable. So Izuku knew he could manipulate sand, but could he create it? So Izuku developed a move called Sandstorm, and this would create a small sand cyclone in his hand, and it would expand, turning everywhere into an artificial desert. So enough with all that, let's finally get to UA. So Izuku walks up to the main gate and he's pretty confident, he's trained a lot and he has improved more than he ever thought he would. So Izuku walks up to the building and he registers his name, writes his name, date of birth, all those personal information. And he also submits a sketch and material list for a hero costume. So he gets a ticket with a number on it and he goes to that table with the same number to take his written exams. Izuku doesn't do amazing, but still enough to pass. Now on to present Mike's speech about the different kinds of robots. Izuku goes to take a seat and sees that it's right next to an old friend. Izuku sits down and Bakugo looks to his right and says, "Hey weirdo, where do you think you're But before he could finish, he realized who it was. He said under his breath, "So they let people like you in. Pfft, not like you'll pass anyways." Izuku smirked and said, "Really?" And the armrest between Izuku and Bakugo, he touched it and used dry out. And Bakugo saw this and was confused, like what was even happening. But Izuku barely touched it and it fell off. Bakugo was shocked to say the least, like what kind of ability is that? But President Mike started to speak. He was explaining all the types of robots they could encounter in the exams, from the small 1-pointers to the building-sized 3-pointers. But one student was confused, Tenya Ida. He stood up and said, "Sir, it says here on the brochure provided by UA that there are in fact 4 robots, and even bigger 0-pointer. President Mike sighed, thinking one day he might actually have to teach this kid. He said, "Well, if you had let me finish, I would have gotten to that. Now, because of you, the exams will be twice as hard than they were supposed to be." Now, everyone in the room was like, "Come on, bro, like what's wrong with you? Why do you have to open your mouth?" Ida was embarrassed and just said sorry and sank back into his seat. Now, President Mike gave a brief description on the 0-pointer, just avoid it, it's an obstacle, it's literally worth no points. So after the explanation, everyone headed to their assigned mock city. While Izuku is waiting, he sees a brown-haired girl is really nervous, and he wouldn't really care, but what's the harm in a few encouraging words? So Izuku goes to walk up to Uraraka when Tenya Ida comes in to save the damsel in distress. He said, "Hey, stop, I know what you're gonna do to sabotage that girl's chances of getting into UA." Izuku said in his mind, "This guy can't be serious," and just kept on walking. Tenya said, "Hey, stop!" But Izuku didn't, and as he was about to hit Tenya, his body turned into sand and went around him. Ida had his eyes closed the entire time, expecting Izuku to bump into him, but when he opened it, he wasn't even there anymore. Ida turned around and saw that the guy was already talking to Uraraka, and they were actually laughing, having a good time, and he just let it go. So while Izuku was talking to Uraraka, a voice came over the intercom. "There are no countdowns in a real fight! Go, go, go!" Izuku quickly ran out of the gate, and it was apparent that, his cleanup off the beach was actually pretty good. He was faster than most that didn't have a speed quirk. So Izuku turned down a street and a 2-pointer was blocking his way. Meanwhile, in the observation room, Nezu and the other teachers were watching the screen when it panned over to Izuku. Aizawa asked, "What's his quirk?" And Midnight looked through the papers and said, "It says here his name is Izuku Midoriya, and he's quirkless?" Everyone in the room shouted, "Quirkless?" All Might protested, like, "We can't let him continue, like, we have to go in there and stop it." And from the way he was running, Nezu knew that wasn't the entire truth. So he said, "Don't worry, let's see how it goes." So the 2-pointer drove towards Izuku, who was surprisingly calm, and Izuku slammed his hand into the ground and said, "Dry out." and the road directly in front of Izuku started to change and morph into sand. This slowed the robot down a lot, and Izuku formed a sort of sword with his hand and said desert sword. Pushing his hand into the ground, it extended all the way to the robot, cutting it in half. The two halves fall apart, and the observation room, all the teachers went silent. Aizawa said, "Quirkless, huh?" And Nezu chuckled. So for the entire exam, Izuku was piecing up these robots. They stood no chance. Except he didn't use his dry out ability on any of them. He didn't really see the need to. So he used sand to get into the circuitries, destroy it from the inside. So soon came the end of the exams, and as Izuku was going to the exit, he heard people running full speed, and when he looked back, all the examinees were running in fear. Izuku was confused why, but they all ran past him. But Izuku wanted to see what was all the fuss about, just out of curiosity. He went towards where they were all running from, and while checking, he heard out loud a girl screaming from around a building. And these screams were those "I'm about to die, please save me" screams, the ones where I have no hope of surviving screams. So Izuku started running, and he reached the source. It was the same girl from earlier, trapped underneath some rubble. Izuku ran up to her and said, "Hey, don't worry, I'm here to help." Izuku used his right hand and touched the rubble, draining all the moisture, and it just fell apart. And while he was doing this, the zero pointer appeared behind him. Izuku turned and saw the towering robot and smiled. This could be an actual challenge. So Izuku ran off and lured the zero pointer away from Uraraka, and as it came closer, it threw a punch at Izuku. Izuku said yeah, and he reached out his hand to use dry out on the zero pointer, but it didn't work, and he got punched into a building. He didn't went through because he turned into sand before he could hit it, but that punch hurt. So Izuku reformed and said, "Okay, I don't know why that didn't work. Anyways, new plan." And he runs to Uraraka and picks her up and dips. By the time Izuku is at the exit, the timer went off, signaling the end of the match. So Izuku just makes sure Uraraka gets the recovery girl and heads home himself. So the entire day, Izuku was just wondering why his dry out didn't work. He could have easily won that. So Izuku took up a book and tried it, and it worked. So he's like, okay, well, at least I still have the ability, so what's up? So he's even more confused, and he's thinking about what's the difference between a robot and everything else he's ever decayed. And it was like a truck just hit him. He felt so dumb. It's made of metal. Izuku quickly went to his fridge to try it, and it didn't work. So fast forward 2 weeks, and Izuku finally came to realize that basically any metallic object is immune to the effects of his abilities. So one day Izuku is having lunch, he's having some, I don't know, whatever is your favorite thing to eat around lunchtime, when Inko barges into his room with a letter, and she was out of breath. And she said, "Izuku, it's from Yue." Izuku wasn't all that excited and said, "Just open it." And Inko said, "Are you sure you don't want to do it?" Izuku said, "I mean, it doesn't really matter to me." So Inko does, and out comes a disc, and from it a hologram of All Might, and it began to speak. "Young Midoriya, you've had an impressive performance in the practical portion, amassing a whole 300 points, more than even me. So I'm pleased to say welcome to Your Hero Academia." Izuku just gave a half-hearted smile and went back to his food, while Inko was more excited for him. And later that day, she actually brought him out to celebrate. They had some good food. So fast forward 1 week, and Izuku had his fresh UA uniform on, ready for his first day. So at UA, Izuku was walking around the school. I mean, if you asked him, he was sightseeing, but he was 100% lost. Izuku then finally saw the sign for Class 1A after 2 years. So he walks in, and right off the bat, he sees Ida and Bakugo arguing. Izuku sighs and says, and just goes to his seat. Meanwhile, Aizawa is trying to get a little shut-eye, but these damn kids, man, they keep talking. Aizawa, he's had enough. He crawls out of his sleeping bag, but first, gives himself a few eye drops. and then says, "Alright, all of you quiet down. I'll be your teacher for the year." And everyone was confused, like, is this guy really her teacher? But Aizawa continued, "If I hear any more talking, I'll just expel you." And Mineta spoke up like, "Hey, that's unfair." And Aizawa looked over to Mineta and said, "Expelled. Get your things and leave." Mineta said, "Hey, are you being serious?" And Aizawa's eyes began to glow red and his hair and scarf began levitating. So Mineta said, okay, I'll go." And he took his bag and left. Aizawa said, "Okay, now take your gym clothes and meet me outside for the practical test." Ochako was going to mention the orientation, but she's not gonna risk being expelled. She's worked this hard to get here. So she rather not. So everyone goes to the changing room and gets their PE gear and head out to the field. Aizawa said, "Okay, I'll have the person with the most points demonstrate." Aizawa pulled out a mini device and said, "Can I get Izuku Midoriya?" Bakugo and the others were shocked. I mean, Izuku doesn't even look like much. So he goes up and Aizawa asks him what was the furthest he's ever thrown in middle school. And he says around 20 meters. And Aizawa says, "Well, now throw the ball with your quirk." Izuku takes the ball and puts some sand around it so he could basically manipulate it mid-air. So Izuku throws the ball as hard as he can and starts pushing the ball further, but it doesn't last long because of his limited range. And Aizawa checks how far the ball went, and it was a measly 200 meters. I mean, still far than most people would ever get, but not even top 5 worthy. Next are all the different kinds of testing the exams like side-to-side lunges, long jump, etc. And by the end of everything, Izuku was 4th, with students like Ida, Bakugo, and Shoto beating him. But Izuku didn't really care though, because when it comes to a fight, Izuku can literally kill you with a touch. So Aizawa sends everyone out to have their lunch. So everyone gets changed, and in the cafeteria, Izuku is getting to know his fellow classmates, Uraraka, Tenya, and Froppy. But then an alarm went off and the whole school was in panic. Izuku's group ran for the emergency exit, but the corridor was crowded. And Izuku took a second to see what was causing all of this. And when he looked through the window, he sees a massive crowd of reporters breaching the gate. Izuku took a second and thought, reporters broke through UA's security measures? I call cap. And as he is thinking, from the shadows, like out of the corner of his eyes, he sees someone moving, and Izuku turns and gave chase. And a hooded figure was in front of him, like at full sprint. So the guy turns a corner and Izuku does as well, but then got a bat to the face, or so the villain thought. Izuku's head did explode, but not in the way he wanted it to. It exploded into sand and reformed seconds later. Izuku grabbed the guy and unrobed him, and he said, "Who sent you?" And the villain said, "I'll never tell you," and spat in Izuku's face. Izuku, now furious, grabbed the guy's face with his right hand and started turning him into a mummy, a dry husk of his former self. Izuku thought, so the villains are making their move? Time to make mine. What move will Izuku be making? Well, find out next time in part 3, because that is where I'm going to be leaving this one off. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. If you liked it, like, and if you like my content in general, subscribe. I checked, there's like 25% of you are subscribed, man. Bro, get that number up for your boy. But anyways, I'll see you guys in the next What If.